being recorded. And Staffan, it's your turn to take over, and thank you.
Thank you. Then I will try to share my screen.
People in the waiting room.
Bra. Oops. You. Vad är de inte? Där.
Now you have it.
Yeah, one second. There,
There. I don't think that. Okay.
there are several more guests coming in. Hold on, please.
So, okay, my name is Staffan Laestadius. I'm a retired professor of industrial transformation at the Royal Institute of Technology in Sweden, and I have, since my retirement, used a lot of time to make, not only to do research on the climate change and transformation, but also on how to communicate it to a wider audience. For those who are abroad, I would say most of what I have written recently is written in Swedish, although as an academic you write more or less in English. So, okay, I will start. I will have a relatively rapid speed through, and I have a lot of screen PowerPoint slides here. About 10 of them I will not show because I have already reserved, so don't be afraid if I just jump over about 2 of them. And I will use about 75 minutes from now. If it's something is very unclear, you may interrupt me, but basically I want to speak the whole time, in one block, so to say. So let's start. No, let's see. I find that we have also fix this. Of course,
I was glad that it wasn't someone calling in that they could not hear.
It is very difficult to hear the professor when he speaks. If he could speak closer to the microphone that's being used, it would be very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, I think you're right, but basically I can't change so much. I can speak about in this loudness, but I want to louder with the microphone, so I hope this is acceptable. I will try to be loud as this for 1 hour and 15 minutes. I hope my voice is enough for that. Okay. Now something has happened, of course. Now, these are all resources for what I speak about. These are basically my own books. I have none of them to say here at the line. That is not relevant for you sitting in the other side of the Atlantic, of course. But you can buy them afterwards, and I will also have my references there. No, almost get rid of it. So, good. Let's start already with 2023, which was the year of global temperature records, and these records continue. This is what I have a lot of slides to introduce this to how severe the present climate crisis is. What you see here is in the background graph, you see the temperature increase during recent decades up here, and you see the record there. In the left graph on the background, you see the long year, 100-year temperature increase, and you see these are moving averages for 5 years, and you see the record upward. It's going upwards to temperature. This is taken down just some days ago from Copernicus, which is the European climate agency. And what you see is the red line is the anomaly of the temperature during the latest 12 months compared to what it should be. And what you see here is that the anomaly is 1.63 centigrades above the industrial levels recent 12 months. That is more than 1.5 centigrades agreed upon in Paris 9 years ago. So in fact, we are above the target. We are fighting to be below already. Although this is after 1 year, but we don't know what will happen. We know now it is very low. This is the temperature in the atmosphere. Here you see, of course, that you're supposed to know the relation between carbon dioxide content in the atmosphere on the one hand and atmospheric temperature on the other. You see the both curves are very similar to each other. I don't have to talk more about that. Suppose. What we often neglect is the temperature in the sea. And I think we should consider it much more serious than we normally think about. Because the sea absorbs about 90% of the heat surface. And what goes down there is left there. And even if the temperature becomes cooler in the atmosphere, you have it as an enormous storage of heat that goes up in the atmosphere. And it makes all, how to say, mitigation activities very difficult. What you see here are two graphs. The left graph is the oceans are getting warmer since I think about 100 years ago. The ocean is getting warmer and warmer and warmer and warmer. And the right graph is a serious one I downloaded just 2 days ago. And it is the temperature in the oceans now. On June 24th, so you see the black, that is the 24. The temperature in the world ocean in 2024. And as you see that the average temperature in the oceans in the world is more than 21 centigrades on the average. You can have a bath all of the oceans for the moment. And here I don't calculate the temperature very close to the poles, but between 60 south and 60 north. You can bath that, do it. And it hasn't been before the sea, the average temperatures for early periods down there. It's small black lines. Okay. This of course has an impact on the cryosphere and the sea level. The cryosphere is the world of ice. I just have some things here. In fact, I can say what you see here in the upper northwest is the green ice is declining. What you see here is very somewhat interesting for those who like skiing. It is the smelting away of all the Swiss glaciers in the Alps. So if you see in the last 2 years, it had an enormous melting down of the glaciers. So I think if you really want to ski in the Alps, you must hurry up. And here is the sea level rise during recent years. I will come back a little bit. Just two perspectives of Greenland. One is Greenland ice is melting much more rapidly now than was believed 1 year ago. In fact, the Greenland is losing 50 million tons per hour, all hours in the year, so to say. That is melting down like this from the surface, going down and out into the sea. And of course, raising the sea level a little bit, but Greenland will in the long run be problematic. But you see, this is what's happening. The picture here is somewhat interesting, and I just mentioned it because we really don't know what the background for this is. But very outside Greenland, it's cold. So in the world, it becomes warmer and warmer and warmer. Just outside Greenland, it's cold. We maybe discuss this is the beginning of the turn of the Gulf Stream, or is it something else? We don't know, and but I just show almost all charts show the larger or smaller area up close to Greenland, which is blue, when everything else in the chart is red. Just to remember. Just some reflections on the ice of Antarctica and Greenland, just for you to remember. This is Antarctica and the west. The big real problem is in the West Antarctica up here. Where all researchers are very scared that this will be melted. And the problem here is that it melts in many ways from above, and that hasn't been that much hitherto, but from below. You see, the sea becomes warmer, very close to the continent, and what you see is like this. And then the ice is going out in the water, and some of the ice is standing on shore, on the bottom of the sea, but then it becomes warmer from below, and that warm water carves out below the glaciers, and then they break and move away. And what happened then? That was the break for the inshore glaciers, which now can move faster to the sea and go into the sea. And that is the real problem. Ice melting from continent will have an impact on sea level rise. See? Okay. This, of course, started a long time ago, and you will talk a lot of the background to this. I will say our addiction to carbon started a long time ago. Here is early times when you used to burn down the forest to have some animals and agriculture there. This is maybe some of you have seen this picture painting before. It is I think they only see it there. But that's it. Another way was during the 19th century, we got our railway station. This is illustrating the steam engine within the railway. And of course, the steam engine, the innovation of that was the made, how to say, carbon dioxide emissions much faster and much more severe. And of course, now you have maybe much from coal plants like this which produce electricity, and I will come back. So this is the origin of what has happened in our atmosphere and in our climate crisis. But the real acceleration started after the Second World War, because then everything started to grow and grow and grow faster and faster and faster in a way that is historically unique. I can show you some illustrations of this hockey stick movement starting in after the Second World War. More or less everything in economics phenomena, but also in geological and geological phenomena. It all went up like hockey sticks like this. I have added another one here, which has to show that it was even late in innovation like plastic started to explode in the 1950s like this. So here you see the explosion of plastic, and you know where all the plastic comes from, more or less. So this is the great acceleration. This is the fundamental problem in our addiction to carbon, and I will come back. I show in the middle, I say we are now on the second half of the chessboard, and I suppose some many will know about the table of the chessboard. The Iranian mathematician who invented chessboard died in 11 years. I don't know so much in the invention. Just put one rice, corner rice in the first square, and 2 on the second, and 4 on the third. So and then you see what happens when we down for some years ago. We are now rapidly doubling our emissions, and nature gives also excavation in the water. I will try to raise my voice, but there are limits. I'm an old man, remember? Anyhow, the carbon dioxide impact of the great accelerations is what concerns us most here. And what you see here is this picture. Here is the Second World War, and you see everything explodes in the emissions of carbon dioxide. And this emission of carbon dioxide, which you have in the left graph, has a consequence, which you see in the right graph, where you see the level for 10,000 years of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Here is the great acceleration. On the 10,000 year scale, that's 2 millimeters. It means what we have in the left.
Can you explain that?
Sorry.
You see,
Did you put your microphone on? I think you are unmuted.
I am muted, yes.
And mute.
You will become more. Can we fix that? This is not possible. So I mute. Now I have unmuted.
Yeah, I think.
Is the world public more interested in this?
The public people, that they're unmuting themselves.
Can I continue? Okay, I try to continue, and if you are not satisfied, you make some noise. What you see in the right graph is that the carbon dioxide content has been more or less constant between 250 and 300 parts per million, and then it raises up like this during the recent 70 years, and that is the fundamental problem. The small graph here is just to showing this variation between 250, 300 years during the last 800,000 years. So you see here, it's a unique expansion during the recent 7 decades. And the interesting thing or alarming thing is this continues. I hope I can skip this. The carbon dioxide emissions are still increasing. I'm not now talking about the content in the atmosphere. I'm talking about the actual emissions, the addition to the content. And here I have a graph from the last 31 years since the Rio conference. The conference in 1992, where the countries in the world were united to say, now we must fight against carbon dioxide emissions. Since then, emissions have increased more than 70%. And last year, 2023, there was an all-time high with 40.4 gigaton addition to the atmosphere. And you see no indication, but it is absolute level is leveling, going down on a global level, although various countries have shown that. But this is the present situation. Now, what are the impacts of this? And I will show you this graph. And what you see here is a graph which is produced by the Stockholm Environmental Institute and published in November 2023. And here you see all the graph connected. The problem is concentrated on this graph in the middle. What you see here, the black part of the curve, that is the historical emissions. They are somewhat more now because this is a year since it was analyzed. Here are the actual plans of all companies and countries in production of emissions into the atmosphere, the red line. The brown line is the country's public plans. And as you know also from Sweden, there is always a difference between what the countries say they should do and how they live up to the targets. And you see here on the global level. The dotted gray line here is what they promised in the Paris negotiations 2015. We are well above that. And then you see the green curve there. That is what we need to go down to if we want to have the temperature as we now believe below 1.5 centigrades above pre-industrial level. And then the dark blue, that is what we have to go down to if we want to keep temperature below 1.5 centigrades. Did I say that? It's 2 centigrades on the green and 1.5 centigrades on the dark blue in the bottom. So there is an enormous gap between what will happen now for 2040 and how it must be if you want to keep the temperature below 1.5 centigrades. And remember, the A here, which I have added, the big black A, that is the surface, the area under the curve. That is what counts, because you add more carbon dioxide every year. And it is not the addiction which is the problem. It is the total amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So the A is important. This is very important in climate activism and climate policy also, because never listen to people say we want to reduce the emissions to 2040 and 2045 and 2050. That is of no relevance. The only thing which counts is the surface under the curve. That is how rapidly we take it down. So it is more important to have a steep downsizing of the emissions than trying to discuss what is happening in 20 years ahead. Remember that. We are now moving to a temperature level of somewhere between 2.2 and 3.5 centigrades above pre-industrial level. And I can say mankind has never in its history any experience of that temperature level. Okay. What is happening now, we are rapidly running out of the window of opportunity in what is called the remaining carbon budget, RCB. And what I show you is here the absolutely latest data on that, which was published in May this year by the same group which do the calculations for IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change. So what they show is how much can we put in the area under the curve, so to say, if you want to be reasonably safe staying under a certain temperature level. And I'm sorry to say, this is the most alarming slide I have to show you. Here is the probability to reach the target. Here is which target we will go to, 2 point centigrades, 1.7 and 1.5. Let's stay on 1.5, not only because that is what normally we want to, but it is also enormous difference between staying on 1.5 and 2 centigrades as regards the consequences for mankind. And if we will have a 67% probability, there is of course variation in this, and we don't know exactly all that stuff, but you have to take it. Then we have just 100 gigaton left to emit into the atmosphere. That is, I'm sorry to say, about 3 years from now. Then the atmosphere is full. Then we are in a situation for mankind which we have never been before. We don't know what will happen. Will it be a rapid melting off? Will there be a rapid more of heat waves and things like that? But it is just 100 gigaton. If you don't like it and say, let's go for 2 centigrades, then we can say we have 900 gigaton. But I can say, if you study what IPCC has said, I wouldn't advise that we should skip the 1.7 target. I would say we have to fight for every 10th of degree or grade. We cannot just go from 1.5 to 2.7. If we don't think we can manage 1.5, I don't think we can. We should try to reach 1.6 or 1.7 or something like that. That should be the target for our climate fight. Okay. So this is another way to illustrate it, just to show. This is the area. This rapid decline is important if you want to stay 1.5 grade. This is 1.7 and this is 2 grades. So this should be our targets. And I think this is the most important thing we have to fight. We must reduce our emissions much faster than what is in the public discourse for the moment. Now, let's go back to this curve. You know it now. Now I have some graphs. I'm not sure I will stay on them so long. I will just say what we have. What I show here, and you don't remember all the details, is that the growth which we have had after the Second World War is a short period in the history of mankind. If you take 1,000 years back and look, so this is a very short period where we have had this great acceleration, which I have talked about, which has also been connected with fast economic growth. Our children will never experience this, what we have had. All here are born after the Second World War. Nobody born 44? Okay. So, and I will just jump over this. What you say, the rapid acceleration has, of course, been connected with growth. And growth, most of all growth that hitherto draws on natural resource, on planetary resources. It isn't necessarily so that all growth in the future must do that, but hitherto it has been drawing on planetary resources, and that means growth as we know it is not compatible with dramatic climate change policy, so to say. I will just, here are too many figures, I know, but you don't have to remember all of them. Just what I show you here is the world is heavier than ever. If someone of you believe that we are in a post-industrial society, forget that. The world has never been as heavy as it is. Everything we excavate is excavated much more than earlier. Look here, what would be of oil, of iron, compared with 2019, copper, etc. And this is the most interesting. This is sediments. All earth and rocks and all things is extremely much moved around in the planet. And the interesting thing is, we don't have to model about that, but how do we do it? We use fossil fuels to do all this work. So this is an illustration of our addiction to carbon, that we do all this. Okay? That means also, and I will come back to the planetary. Then 30 years ago, some of you were engaged in natural resources. We are getting out of them in the planet and things. The interesting thing in the new discourse is we are not having a problem due to lack of resources. There are, in fact, many of them. The problem is we don't have atmosphere to put all our rubbish in. So we have got rid of the atmosphere, not of the planet, what is down in the earth. This is a fundamental change in our way how we look at it. We don't know where to put the emissions, even if you can find iron in the ground. Okay, and this we are then approaching what Johan Rockström calls the planetary boundaries on level after level after level. I will not talk more about that. Yeah, skip this. But this I have told you just to illustrate. In fact, now when we have more emissions than ever, you see the expansion here of coal. It's an enormous expansion of coal for the moment. Since 1965, this is of course a mirror of China's and India's expansion, but in fact we have all-time high in the production of coal for the moment. This is USA is down here. Most other countries are reducing this, but this is a global level. China and India are important here. And this is the oil production. This is also all-time high. So I think we haven't even started to go down. Although some of you may have seen figures that some countries have started. We can say Europeans have gone down and the US have gone down and so. But on the global level, we are still increasing our emissions. Skip this. Skip this. This is just to say that the problem is not the reserves. The problem is we have no place to put the emissions. Okay, let's now go more to our sense. So the rate of acceleration can also be described not only on everything we produce and emit, but also it has created freedom for us. So I will say freedom is just another word for nothing left to lose. You may know who wrote it. No, she's there, but Chris Christopherson wrote the text. Oh Lord, won't you give me a Mercedes-Benz? No, and I think this is the fundamental problem for us. We have become addict to carbon, and now I will go to the individual level. This was the means to travel over the world to make emigration to the America, for example. I earlier showed you the old railway, which connected Europe. It created the European middle class, of which you all are some members of. We created a European identity and all that stuff. So we benefited from this, of course. And here is, you see all the mid-19th middle class people standing on the railway station and wanting to travel out in the world. And this is the modern way of traveling, of course. And all this creates emissions. And the problem here is that we love it. We are used to it. And you see here the frog, you know, of course, the history of the frog, which is in the water becomes warmer and warmer. In our case, it's the atmosphere. And we are used to it. And it is very difficult in this situation to argue that we should get away with it to fight climate emissions. So we have a two-front war. Of course, we have a war against the large emitters. You all work with that, the big emitters, the big companies, etc., 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 etc. But then we have the fight against ourselves as a collective. I think this is the most important thing to remember. It is not only a fight against them, it is also a fight against ourselves. That makes climate struggle extremely difficult. Okay, and of course, this is against our beliefs. We don't believe it. We think mankind is a master of nature. That is what many of us have learned. And in fact, many of those who have education in the humanities have been struggling against those who have in natural science, saying, no, in this area, man is the master of the nature, so to say. And now nature fights back. It is against our experiences. We really haven't experienced it. Now we are beginning to do it. It is against our ideas. We couldn't believe that this is true. And we think this is our freedom. We get much of our freedom from using more carbon. To travel everywhere, I will not ask on your travel habits, But of course, take the flight to Bilbao, to the Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao. Isn't that a good thing? But you have the emissions, of course. And yeah, and of course, you can go to Thailand and things like that. This is also what we think is against our belief in progress. We say mankind is progressing. Then we must ask, how much of that progress is based on burning more fossil fuels, for example? And welfare. We have a lot of our welfare. And things. So this is the real struggle to find out how to do to handle this. And of course, just to say it, this is against our mastering of nature. We thought we were mastering the nature, now the climate fights back. Idea of progress, yeah. Man, you will always say that mankind is progressing. It is we are developing, we are going forward. That is what we learn to say. And is that the same thing as saying that we are using more carbon today than we did yesterday? Let's go from that to a serious problem. I think this is much many of you are very scared about, and this is the inequality. This is not an equal one. So the whole climate crisis is also strictly connected to an enormous inequality on more or less all levels. If you just want to read one text about this, download Oxfam's texts they come with reports on this. There is more also the French economist Piketty and his colleagues from the French School of Economics and some others. But if you just read one text, read Oxfam. I have taken these from Oxfam. This is how the division of the deciles and etc. on how much they emit. And what you see is the one richest percent is the top 1% is much more than the 50% in the bottom of the pyramid. This is extremely inequality. So this is how the distribution of emissions relating to where in the income scale you are. And even here, don't think that you can find on the luxury yachts and all the illustrations on that, and I think this is an enormous problem. But I can imagine that many in this room belong to the richest 10% of the world. Maybe all of you, and us, belong to the richest 10%. We don't probably not belong to the richest percent, but I'm sure on the richest 10%. I've seen an information in Oxfam, all legislators in the United States belong to the richest percent, for example. Yeah, so this is, we must be aware of where on the inequality stage we are ourselves. Let's discuss it a little more analytically, because I think you are concerned about this question. This is one of the challenges we have in our climate mitigation struggle. We can have an individual approach, saying they emit much more than those. The richest individual, and we know about the richest percent all over the world. How many roughly there are in the United States, but there are a lot of them in India and China and Australia, etc., etc. Then we can also have a gender approach. This is very easy. How much do men? What is the difference between men and women on the average? We can have a country approach. Some countries emit more than others. Some say that we all know that China emits more than all other countries. Then, of course, if you divide with the population, we get some other results. We can have an historical approach, because some countries have historically been very much emitting. The United Kingdom, for example, not the least the United States. So historically, you may argue that if you use a strict historical approach, the United States should be allowed to have no emissions at all now. I think this is the same with the United Kingdom. Of course, that is not a realistic way to handle politics, but this is a way to discuss it. We can have a stages of development approach. I think this is interesting, and we have to find this. If you talk about with the Chinese student, which I have done, they may say that, well, you have emitted before in your development path. Now we are behind you in our development path. Now we have the right to emit now. So I don't like that argument because I think it's wrong, because now the late developing countries must not necessarily do the same mistakes that we did. They should use modern technology. That is what I call the leapfrogging approach. That is, nowadays, technology make it possible to do other things. The Chinese know that. They are world leading in wind power. They are world leading in photovoltaics. They are world leading in constructing railway systems. And they are world leading in much of digital economy also, all which is very low climate impact. So leapfrogging is the answer to those who say we have the right now. I think this is, then we have the realistic approach. How much can we argue for? Then how do we create climate justice? I will have a very concrete thing on the next slide. I think the important thing in fighting here is to get acceptance in the bottom of the pyramid, or those who believe they are in the bottom of the pyramid, is that you have a very radical reduction strategy for the top. I think this is extremely important. You will never have a success in climate mitigation, in climate struggle, so to say, if you don't do something radical in the top. Those who have these private jets, which I have a picture of here, or those who have those yachts, which I have a picture of there. So let me be concrete just to show. We can have discussions in all detail. And this is just to give you an overall picture. Taxing the rich, there is a lot we can do, even in the globalized world. Property taxes, housing taxes, and we can also ask for climate solidarity taxes or some kind of. During the coming 10 years, you have to pay 3 or 4% more of the income because those who have a certain, above a certain level. This is a way to handle it. We can have tax emissions, aviation. I think I have a slide later on that. A very radical tax on aviation to reduce it. You can tax on gasoline and on heavy cars. I am arguing for strong taxes on all cars, whether they are electric or not, which are heavier than 600 kilo. Why 600 kilo? That is roughly the weight of the original T4, which was developed in the United States 110 years ago. So, I mean, if they could produce a car which was below 600 kilo heavy, we can do it today also. 600 kilo, all cars above that should have a very heavy tax, even the electrical ones, as I have. We can have pay and dividend taxes, which I have in some Canadian states. And I think, in fact, that is argued in Sweden. It is argued by a group, I think it is the same group in the United States. In Sweden, it's called Klimatsvaret, which has an argument for that. The pay and dividend tax is you collect the taxes and immediately distribute it to all the people. So you can't say that the finance minister just wanted to take it. And that means those who have bad behavior will pay, but those who have good behavior and transform to good behavior will get money. And I made calculations on that. If you put 1,000 Swedish crown on every start, and 1,000 crowns on every landing in a Swedish international, starts in Swedish aviation, you will collect a hell of a lot of billions of money, which could be redistributed, and all normal families in Sweden will get about 12,000 crowns. And that means they, of course, some of them will use to buy a flight ticket and get away, but that is not the intention. But you can say, then you get some, it is fair to take from those who have bad behavior and give to those who have good behavior. So we can do things like that. You can have some subsidies. I always talk about transformation subsidies. They should ask you to speed up the transformation, then you should get the rail. That is difficult because you get used to transformation. You can have it on e-cars, on charging stations, on public transport, but you cannot have generally subsidizing public transport. That is too expensive. When you can have tax reductions in rural areas and things like that. So there are a lot of things to do. I just am superficial here, but you can discuss this. Yeah, globalization, we can have, I could have a whole lecture on that, and I will not. I will just say globalization has always been there. So I think it's not, you can't stop it. The interesting thing is I think you we have now moved into hyper-globalization situation where many people believe they are losers. And there are obvious people who also are very extreme beneficiaries of this. So I think we have to handle this to make that people don't believe that they are losers and don't in reality become losers. And a British sociologist, David Goddard, he made a distinction between anywheres and somewheres. Anywheres are, many of you are probably anywhere. You can live wherever you want to. You are used to be in a globalized world and things like that. And you can many languages, and you have professional skills which are useful. But somewheres are those who have problems with this, who maybe are stuck to where they are. And of course, they are scared. And you know, but many of them also try to put their ballots in the votes in extremely populist parties because they are scared for what they are seeing. So I think we have to handle this. Democracy, I think climate crisis is a real challenge for democracy. Especially as long as the politicians don't want to be proactive and argue for a mobilization, but do this. Those are out in the other side of the Atlantic don't see that I put up my finger, but the wet finger feeling is the wrong way to handle climate transformation. We really need proactive policies from the politicians. I have some things here on growth. I will not talk so much about. I say my primary focus when I have other speeches and then this is skip the discussion on growth. There are some people talking about degrowth, others are talking about green growth and things. I think this is not the fundamental problem. The fundamental problem is what I call transformation. We have to reduce all activities which are bad. And if we can, so we should add new activities which are good. And the bad activities are those who emit carbon dioxide. This may end up in growth, or it may not, but this is not our primary interest to discuss. This is what I do here. I will just say, this is the bad activities. Taking the flight everywhere. These are the green activities, which I suppose many of you want to do. And these are activities which may be bad, like building a railway, but once it is built, constructed, it will provide green services. So the transformation is the core thing, not discuss and get stuck in discussions on whether we should have growth or not. Leave that to others. This is our addiction to coal. What you see here is that 82% of all energy produced in the world is related to carbon, to oil, natural gas, and coal. So our task is to reduce those 82% to zero. And one way is to increase these areas. This is nuclear, this is hydroelectricity, and this is renewables. Here you have photovoltaics and wind power. This is an enormous task. Because even if you reduce this a little, this is an enormous impact on that. You see that? So that skip the data here. It just says, so if you just reduce carbon emissions, it's 7%. That is about 40 exajoule. And put it to the renewable energy forms. That will increase them enormously. In fact, you have to increase the renewable energy with about 20%, just reducing fossil carbon. You can count it different ways. So I call this the accelerator. For example, in buses, just reducing a little of car transport in Sweden will cause an increase in bus transport with about 30% a year. So this is the accelerator. And I think people don't really, we have difficulties to imagine this. This is an enormous challenge, but we can do it. the recent years of expansion in wind power and in photovoltaics has been enormous. Unfortunately, not in Sweden. Even if Sweden has had, but we are leveling down now. My argument is that the present government doesn't take the advantage or the opportunity to rapidly increase this because they are too much discussing nuclear power. But it is still possible, but it will be an enormous task, and we don't have to hesitate for it. It is possible. Just showed you now, those who are in the United States will not find this so interesting, but I will just show you the potential for increasing renewables in Sweden. So listen to me and don't get afraid of the data. Here is a lot of European countries. Here are Sweden and Germany. I benchmark against Germany. I compare Sweden with Germany. Here is how much installed wind power we have onshore. Here I have divided it with the surface over our countries. And then you see that Germany has 159 megawatts and Sweden has 32. The Germans have 5 times as much installed wind power on their continent than we have in Sweden. It is possible to have that. They also have 10 times as large population who could scream, not in my backyard, not in my backyard. And they still have it. Let's look on offshore. You see, Germany has so much installed in megawatt offshore, and so little is Sweden, just one. They have 40 times as much offshore as we in Sweden. Let's look at sun. Here is the installed capacity of the photovoltaics. Here I also divide with the surface of the countries. What you see here is that Germany has 30 times as much photovoltaics installed on this highly densely populated country than we have in Sweden. What this illustrates, it is possible. So you skip the details, just they have much more. Why don't we have it? We can if we really feel we want to. I will not discuss this. I don't discuss this. This is the growth of photovoltaics. This is the picture here is the cost curve going down like this, and this is the installations going up. During the recent 10 years, the cost of photovoltaics as well as wind power has dramatically decreased. It is now the cheapest form of energy ever. So this is how they have growth. They grow a lot of renewables. And here is just the cost. What you see here is the interesting that all costs of renewables are going down. There's only one net source of energy which is becoming more expensive, and that is nuclear. And there is a lot of this. This is just to show you the cost increase compared to original schedule for to the left. There is a dramatic cost increase for so-called small and medium-sized reactors. You see they're growing. The original price in the left and the final price in the right. The right graph is the schedule, how much delayed they are in their construction. You normally plan that you should construct your nuclear power for 3 to 4 years, and they end up in 12, 13, 13, and 13 years to construct. These are empirical data from already done constructs, so to say. So my conclusion in this, we just need one nuclear power plant, which is immediately available and wasteless in addition. Yeah, and you see which one I mean. Yeah, I have some minutes left. Let's talk a little about transport. This is more related to Sweden than it is to many other countries. And the reason for that is that Sweden have no coal plants. We don't produce electricity with coal. And we have, similar to France, we have a lot of nuclear power historically, and we have a lot of water power, hydropower. So that means for us, emissions from transport is the largest problem in our carbon dioxide, in our climate transformation, so to say. So here you see the global thing. Here are transport, and here you have it in Sweden, which is transport. Yeah, here you have Sweden. So roughly you can see that half of our emissions come from transport. In fact, it is more than half if you put in tractors and machines in working, etc. 57%. So no transformation in Sweden ever can be done without starting the transport sector. There is no alternative. I mean, up here in the yellow sector, there is the steel production, and they are doing whatever they can to reduce emissions from steel. So we must start with transport in Sweden. And that is also a problem related to nuclear power, because you can't run cars with nuclear produced energy before 2040. We must do a hell of a lot before 2030. So everything in Sweden related to carbon dioxide emissions reduction must be heavily based in transport. And of course, one part here you can do a lot, and I will not discuss the details, but we can, of course, this has impact on aviation, on railways, on maritime transport, etc., etc. And much of its challenges are fundamental views. We are addict not only to carbon, we are addict also to cars. And as soon as we discuss this, so everybody say, what should I do? I am working there and I'm living here, and etc., etc. So there is a lot of beliefs here, and that means this is important to argue. It is important to find out what people believe is the problem, and it is important to handle it. I will just show you our addiction to cars. This picture down here in the southeast. You know what it is? This is at 8 o'clock in the morning outside a school for small children in Stockholm city. All children are transported there by their parents with cars. Don't you think there is an alternative solution to this problem? I will not discuss it in detail. You see the small child walking here between. Okay. I will now just illustrate. I don't ask how many of you how much you fly. But I will just illustrate this, and I have this in Swedish. So those of you who are overseas can do the same in the US, and I'm sure you have much more flights in the US than we have in Sweden. I have made a calculation, because in Sweden, if you want to stay in this 1.5 centigrade target, we have to reduce our emissions with at least 7, maybe up to 10% per year. So now I made a calculation of reducing the emissions from aviation in Sweden with 7%. What is the impact for the first year? You have to just stay with 7%, then we have to take 7% again. So let's do it. If we want to do it, we have to reduce half of all aviation to Copenhagen, half of all aviation to Oslo, 30% of all aviation to Malmö, and to Gothenburg and to Umeå. And then in addition, we have to reduce another 0.6 million starts and landings. This is the first year of reduction to just keep to the 7% target. Then you say that is not realistic. And then where should we do the reductions then? Can you say some other sector where we should do it? And here is just to start in the domestic aviation. In year 3, we must take all the international aviations, including those of you who love to transport yourself to Thailand. You can do this in different ways, but there is no short-time fuel available which is emission-free. If you can do it, but you can't get that in 2 or 3 years. Now, this is about maritime transport. Yeah, this is just a picture I had for some of my students. Do you know that in 120 years ago, there was as many electric cars as fossil-driven cars as is now? In fact, many taxis were driven by electricity, and it was no real car. It was more looked upon as a female car because it was not that noisy. yeah, this is, I will end up with some talk on natural resources, biomass and steel. I think this is a fundamental problem. We cannot solve it here now in my presentation here. But the problem is that everybody's now looking for biomass to solve the problem. So on the one hand, European Union say we must store more biomass in our forests. On the other, everybody wants to use biomass for construction. I think this is a legitimate thing. And we also want to have more, have a biodiversity. We must put something more. And in addition, not only to biodiversity and construction, everybody wants to put it into the tanks of their cars. And biofuels is, I will say, don't accept that it is so easy that you just put biofuel in the tank and you solve the climate problem. It is far from that. First, there isn't enough for biofuels to put in all our cars in the world. There are maybe 2 countries which can manage it, Sweden and Finland, maybe Canada also. That is the first thing. Secondly, biofuels are not that efficient as others. So those of you who have a biofuel car know that you need 25% more energy than if you take gasoline in it. Third argument is the important. If you burn biofuels now, you get the emissions now. And those carbon dioxide molecules are the same kind of molecules as those coming from fossils. And then in the future, maybe, if you have made some forest plantations, those plants will absorb. But there is a time discrepancy between 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 decades between the emissions and the reduction. And the climate crisis is here now. We have to do a lot before 2030. So don't go on the argument that we should put biofuels to say in our tanks and to save our problem. So I will just end up, I have one big picture, but I will just show you that this is a fundamental problem in the Swedish debate. And we know now that biomass is the only thing we have. We can use it for everything. And then, of course, why should we burn it? But we do what we do. During the recent 40 years, we have tripled our use of biomass in the energy system. In fact, 128% of all our energy use now comes from the forest, from biomass. And the emissions from that burning of biomass has increased with 30 megaton a year from 23 to 53 during the period 1990 to 2020. That is only megaton, exactly what we have reduced the carbon dioxide emissions from fossil fuels. So we haven't even started our transformation away from carbon dioxide emissions. We have just transformed the emissions from fossil fuels to biomass. And biomass is something which, as I told you, isn't that good. It could be good, but not in this thing. So I think this is a fundamental problem. This is a good way to use it. You know what this house to the left is? Ah, that is the cultural building in Skellefteå, Sara. I don't think I have to talk about this. One way to use wind power is to use hydrogen, and using hydrogen, you can use it to produce steel very efficient and with no emissions at all. In fact, LKAB and SSAB can go from being the most emitting industries in the country to the cleanest industries in the country. The emissions will be water. I'm now in the end. I think I should make a quotation to Antonio Guterres. I think he's the world leader, which I think is the most interesting in the discussion on climate change. The era of global warming has ended. The era of global boiling has arrived. Leaders must lead. No more hesitancy. No more excuses. No more waiting for others to move first. There is simply no more time for that. It is still possible to limit global temperature rise to 1.5 centigrades and avoid the very worst of climate change, but only with dramatic, immediate climate action. That was my message. Thank you.
Okay, here is a suggested format that, some of you may have questions. And if you can get my attention, then I can select you, and then at the same time, we have people that will be on the chat. And I will try to communicate the questions that you have to them and communicate to them the questions that you have, and the other way around. So, and, please, let's see what we have here coming on the chat box. And please write your questions into the chat box. And do we have a question here from our audience here in Dawn? Anyone like to raise a question? If any of you?
No.
Okay. We'll start with you, if I can.
Yeah. I would like to ask the question about this European Climate Pact, which was something positive when it was adopted in 2021 or something.
No.
What is your opinion about that? If it is implemented, will it contribute to something positive? Will it contribute to this 7%? Or
No.
what else? Or how should that be materialized, executed in reality?
Also, to be short, the European climate package, which is summarized in something called Fit for 55. I think, and that is summarizing a set of legislation, and I will not go into the details, but my personal view of it is that this is presently the most advanced policy package in the world. There may be some local things, but this is, and as long as you can keep the European countries united and working with it, I think this is an enormous good thing to do. But I think it is in danger. I think it is in danger due to the recent election, because I think there are many of those, there is a policy shift now, which I think can have impact on this. I also think that many politicians in the various European countries who have signed the Fit for 55 agreement really haven't realized its consequences.
Precisely.
I think even the Swedish government, where they promoted it, the present Swedish government, 1 year ago, was it then? Yeah. I don't think they realized the implications of it. So we have to defend it. Then I would say, from my personal view, it isn't enough. But there is nothing which is more enough than this.
So we have a comment here for transformation subsidies. I suggest you put them in order of preference with public transport first. Would you like to comment on that position?
In Sweden, Sweden differs from most other countries here. In Sweden, our emissions are to more than 50% based on transport. That means we can't neglect it. We must start with transport. Then we have other things too. But of course, other countries which are stuck in electricity produced by coal plants have other tasks. But Sweden is transport first. And the implication is that could be development. And then of course on the energy side, I mean, if you really want to speed up that, you must get a lot of electricity rapidly. And then I don't believe there is any potential in nuclear, whatever you like it in the long run.
I think was it Ford that had a
I think you.
I wonder if you account also with the military, what they are producing, or is this, have you accounted for that?
Yeah, it is difficult to get any details on the military emissions. I have seen a report on the United States military, and I don't know what is with other countries, but I think the military spending causes emissions which would put if you compare with other countries, they will be at least in the middle of the line. But I don't have the details, in fact. But this is the same with all militaries, even in Russia and Ukraine, everywhere. Maybe some militaries are more emitting than others, but those details I don't know. But of course, there is a lot of emissions from military. Pardon?
You read the cost of war, this investigation.
I haven't read that book. There are books I haven't read.
That's not.
But I know about it, and I have a file here where I try to collect some things, but I have nothing to present.
They have gone to the energy department to find out because the military department doesn't.
Yeah, but you can, but there is statistic with where it is included. For example, 1 week ago, or was it even last Monday? 1 week ago, the Energy Institute produced a world survey in energy statistics. That was originally produced of British Petroleum, which had produced that for 38 years, 28 years or something. That is the best statistics in the world. And here you get the statistics from the production side, so to say, from the wells, and from the origin produced from the wind power stations and things like that. That means the emissions coming from there necessarily includes all military emissions. So I think that statistic, which you get here with 40 gigaton, I have that data here, 40 gigaton last year comes from that. That necessarily includes military, because they don't have any sources of their own.
There is a question here, which how do we get the slide presentation, please? And first of all, there is a recording of this presentation, which will go up on the nasca.org website, which is under EduCat, and will be there, I would say, within a week. And you can download that speech by, it's an excellent speech, by the way, phenomenal in your data and your statistics. I think very impressive. It can be downloaded and everyone has access to it. Maybe if Staffan is inclined, you'd like to share your slides or your link later.
Yeah, I normally have no hesitations to share my slides. I normally share them in PDF format, and I normally go through them and take out some photographs which I may have stolen from the web, and there may be photographers who don't like me to use, like that I use them. So I can take it, but more or less all public is left. But maybe 10 photographs will get away, and it will get a PDF version. And of course, you know that, yeah, that's the.
And I did notice that there were Swedish slides for the.
Yeah, I didn't have time to translate everyone.
But yeah, I was going to suggest use one of the translation forms that are online for that purpose. And I will take the liberty to ask you just a general question. We have peak emissions of CO2, methane. We have a time delay to, let's say, an estimated maximum impact of that. First, on the physical, biological world, flooding, and so on. And then we have another delay impacting the social damage and loss of life and so on. What estimated time, in your opinion, is there between the maximum emission level and the maximum damage to human existence? If we do not, and that presumes we will be able to turn the tide.
Yeah. Let's first say, now, without going into details, we have the global level and we have country level. We have other levels also, but let us take those two. On the global level, we are still increasing, although the rate of increase is decreasing. You remember the derivatives from school here, yeah? So the rate of increase is decreasing, but it still is increasing in emissions on coal, on gas, and on oil. That is a fundamental problem. Then if you divide it, you can find that there are primarily developing countries or newly industrialized countries like China and India who are expanding, and not the least Africa, which is a real problem here. Although they are small, but they are to 100% dependent on oil and coal, in fact. There is no renewables at all, more or less. But then, of course, you have countries like the US and the European countries and others, which have decreasing their emissions because they are moving into renewables, and there have also been some crisis impact and some like, so they have leveled off and are peaking, in fact. But I would say that if you don't press further down, the peak will be very, very, very slow in countries like the US, for example, which is very late on electric vehicles, where China is leading on electric vehicles. And in fact, I would argue that why don't we import all those Chinese cheap vehicles if we really want to transform, instead of just trying to save Volkswagen and Audi. But that's yeah, but that's about the peak. So you couldn't trust the peak. Everybody talks about historically countries have peaked in various things in going from industrial to service economies, but you can't trust the peak. You must fight to force it down. And you must do it within 1 decade, rapidly. Then you can, if you do it, then you can have a tail for some decades. So the peak is there, but it's problematic. Don't trust it.
Question? Yes?
I think it's very professional, Staffan. I would like to ask what the Swedish, the Social Democrats and the Center Party, because there might be a new government in a few years. What are their response to your, if you speak to some of their leaders? Because I had a big problem in the European election campaign discussions now, especially about the forest, the bioenergy discussions with the Center Party. It was a terrible discussion. And the second thing is just a comment. I totally agree with you that we have all this discussion about growth or not growth. It goes on forever. This is I agree with you on this, but it's important, for example, the new steel plant in Boden.
Yeah.
It's going to double the steel production in Sweden. So they are cleaner, but they're going to use a lot of new electricity. So how much steel we produce is of course important.
Yeah, but then of course,
Excuse
yeah.
me, could you maybe just explain the background to the position of the Center Party on the forest for the general public?
There was a reference to the Swedish parties in the parliament. We have 8 parties in the parliament, and we have presently a right-wing government. And what you were referring to, the potential for have a center-left government, the Social Democratic and the Center Party, and then of course the Green Party and or with some relation to the left-wing party. So that it was your, and then you said that he had discussions with at least the Center Party, which is basically have a lot of members which are forest owners and living on the rural areas, and they are very scared of in the forest discussion, of course. But I think this relates to what I had a slide about our fundamental beliefs and how we look upon our freedom. So I mean, the freedom and to use your property as you like it is something which has developed. Then people believe that if I own a forest, I have the right to do whatever I want with it. And this is a belief which is fundamentally so. We must discuss these things. On the climate change challenges many of our fundamental beliefs on how we should do. So I think this is a learning process, and or from your point of view, a teaching process. So that's one thing. I have talked with people in all political parties. There is one party I have never been invited to. That is the far right, which is the most dominant party in the present government. Although they are not present, they are not member of the government, which is probably confusing for the overseas participants here. But the other parties, I think, in most other parties, there are people thinking on this. But I'm somewhat scared. I don't hesitate to say that I'm scared that some of the present government parties have got so stuck in their beliefs in nuclear power that they don't see the problems. And there is an overwhelming lot of studies and reports saying that the time schedules are very slow, much too slow for your plans, and the costs will be much higher, and there are no companies able to build, construct these things, etc., etc. And I say this, and I must admit, I am not 100% against nuclear power, but I am absolutely, my argument is nuclear power may in the future have some advantages in reusing the rubbish from the earlier nuclear production. And if you use it the second round, you can reduce the whole the period it goes on. But it is not, it has nothing to do with fighting climate crisis. And that is my primary argument. You may have it in the future, but you cannot fight climate crisis with it. And that is what we are doing now. That's my argument.
Question from one of the audience, emeritus, if all energy somehow becomes emissions free, is wasting energy still a problem?
What
That was, it's a little bit of a curve here, but it's up there to the right-hand side. If all energy somehow becomes emissions free,
yeah.
is wasting energy still a problem?
Yeah, I mean, my basic argument is there is, we can, I don't have the figures in my head, there are a lot of figures, so I forget. But we can, humankind just uses a fraction, a small fraction of all incoming solar energy. And you can, of course, use that directly through photovoltaics, or indirectly through wind power, or water hydroelectricity. And there is, as I can see, enough to use these sources for decades ahead. And then we don't necessarily have to accept all forecasts of how much we must use in the future. We can also argue that we could look for other development paths which are not that energy consuming. So I would say there is an enormous potential in renewables, and that was my benchmarking with Germany, just showing on a very concrete level, we can have 10 times as much energy as we have now from renewables, if you really want to.
Do we have any questions here from the audience? Yes. Laura.
Okay. I have a question. Your approach is very much focused on Sweden, what we should do here in Sweden.
Yeah.
And that seems to be the ethical right way to do it. But still, I'm curious about, see, the most emission is, as you mentioned, in Africa, Asia, the bigger populated countries. And how is your, isn't that more, because it's also a motivating factor for here in Sweden, for people to respond. And also, do you have an idea that if that's the case, it's the bigger problem actually for the total global in those countries? Do you have a perspective how the West could help those countries? That's one question. Another question is, I have to go back.
Wasn't the first one enough? Of course, I've been thinking on that, but I think we can't use all the evening for this. But basically, of course, this is climate crisis is a global phenomenon. And what I've been focusing on the global aspects, a lot of my slides were that. Then I became concrete on the more Swedish level, because that is what we can do. I think one important thing here is that we should focus on what we really could have impact on. And then we can hope that this will have some kind of impact, indirect impact, and we are becoming some kind of people, other countries look at us. That's the only way we can do it. But the major way we can do it. And then, of course, if we can do this, manage this, people in other countries, Norway, Netherlands, and other parts of Europe, see what they do in Sweden. Then of course we have second order effects in China and other countries. There are some areas where you can have another impact. Africa, for example, are very small totally in emissions. So they are not a big problem from a global point of view. But if they really want to develop, they must find new ways of doing that. And then they could, and we should help them to leapfrog to renewables. In fact, there are more or less no renewables at all in Africa. There's an enormous market, if you want, for companies. It is an enormous political challenge to show people. So I think this is what we can do outside. And then now it's more or less discussed that if you do something there, we don't have to do so much at home. That is an argument which is relevant in the European context. But I think we should do all this at home. And in addition, we should help the African countries to develop. The Chinese know this, can do this themselves. And India, of course. I think the real fundamental problem now is India, because they are rapidly starting up a lot of coal-powered electricity plants for the moment. And they also have some, at the same time, facing the crisis in the form of a heat wave in northern India. And then I don't see, did you talk about the population thing? No, because that is something I think is not relevant in climate fighting. And if nobody thinks that is so. Okay, more questions?
Yes, first personal one. Are you in need of a glass of water because you've been talking very well and I'm seeing that your glass is empty? Or is it down there?
Is it empty?
No, it's full, it's full.
It's full.
Okay.
Then of course you can always in this, is the glass half full or half empty?
Question from overseas or not or Polaco. Politicians are very afraid to take bold action. They would need a push from the masses, which will never happen until there is sufficient general awareness of the climate emergency. So a related question to that is, how would you, in your opinion today, given the evanescent quality of the way people respond to the problem, it's not considered as serious as it should be, in part, I think, because of our media and our culture and the influence of ideas that are ridiculous. How would you urge communicating to the average person the message of the severity of the problem?
First of all, if that woman is coming from overseas, I do not know enough on the American context, so I will not talk about that. But in Sweden, I think, I blame our politicians. Maybe the recruitment of politicians is the wrong way. This is a more or less marginalized group. I think the political parties have declined 30% in their size, 30% annually during 30 years. I think all of you are members of the Svenska Naturskyddsföreningen. And I think Svenska Naturskyddsföreningen is larger than all political parties together, or roughly in the same size. So I think the selection among politicians is too bad. I think politicians for a moment, I say they should take the command and mobilize people. And historically we have had it, Churchill, you remember all Churchill's rhetoric in mobilizing the British? In fact, Franklin D. Roosevelt argued a lot for the New Deal in the United States during the 30s. And another person who really tried to mobilize and had ideas on what to do was in fact Kennedy. When he defended the Apollo project, he said, we don't do this because it is simple, easy. We do this because it is difficult. Or that was his way to argue, this will be a task for us and we have to solve it. I think this kind of strategy you don't find in Swedish politicians. And I think this is a pity because people are scared. Are we not allowed to do as we have, what we have done? Are we not allowed to travel where we want? What will happen? And in addition to that, will the rich people always be floating on the surface and the poor people take all the problems? So I think from that point of view, this is a political problem. And politicians have to be mobilizing, and you here have to be mobilizing. And my task in this is to be out having lectures, folkbildning as we call it. And I think most of you are engaged in it in one way or another. I think this is important. And in addition to that, which was not the question, is this transformation now ahead is primarily a cultural and political question. It is not primarily the technical question. We have that technical knowledge and those innovations which we need to start up with. I say this coming from a technical university. I'm in favor of innovations, but we know a lot. And we should not accept the argument from some politicians also in Sweden saying that we have to wait for the engineers to produce the technical knowledge. We don't have to wait for technological innovations in the future to solve the problems of today. We have knowledge today.
So we have another question from the audience here. Yes.
Okay, I wonder, like, the figures that you show is for the CO2 figures for Sweden, is the CO2 produced in Sweden. It does not include, it doesn't take into account the CO2 consumed.
Yeah, I know. Now this is of course, we see on the global level, all carbon dioxide emissions. So if I say that the energy-related carbon dioxide emissions are 40 gigaton, that includes everything. But then, of course, some of the emissions in China end up in products consumed in Sweden, and some emissions in Sweden end up in technical systems which is used in Germany, for example. So you have another map there. And basically, the national statistical authorities know this, so they can have rough estimates. So, and of course, then you can analyze this. You can say that the Chinese, a very large part of the Chinese emissions relate to things they export to Sweden. So the consumption you have is basically related to emissions in China. And we export less emissions in that way because our export is of another kind than the Chinese. But it's difficult to calculate if the Chinese built a new city with a lot of concrete in the houses for the people who live there. Should those emissions be included in the microwave oven which is produced there and which you buy? It is not easy to get good calculations. So, but there are, the European Union produces this kind of calculation, and the Swedish Naturvårdsverket produce it also. We know roughly, and from that kind of view, we can say that we still are responsible for more emissions per capita than the Chinese, although they are rapidly coming close to us. Are you satisfied with the answer?
But most of us start to consume something.
No. Yeah, China or India or something like that, yeah.
So I think we have time for one more question, if it's all right, Colin. And then a little summary or a short announcement after this. Colin, from the audience here, please.
Thank you. I want to again leave the military part of this. I think there is something of the elephant in the room, actually. Because I think that if we stop the military thinking and stop the wars and the exercises and everything, would you think that would really make a difference so we could reach the goals about climate change?
I'm not, yeah, let me say it again. I think you are right. I agree with you. If we can stop military, if we can thinking, if we can get rid of all this armament, we will reduce emissions. I think I agree with that one, that statement. But on the other hand, I don't think, and I am sure that the climate crisis fight could start with that, because we have had these emissions growth irrespective of whether we have had war or peace. It is more fundamental. So we can't stop fighting climate crisis now and only focus on peace. We may focus on peace, but we still have to focus on climate crisis. And that is the reason, that is my main argument. This is the fundamental thing, and it relates also to biodiversity. So I think this is an important thing to say. So,
but you will get the resources to invest in what's got to be done for transition.
yeah, I'm not against, but can't we have two things,
Definitely,
thoughts
we have to have it.
in our brains? On the one hand, fighting against climate crisis, which is my main focus. And then some of you may focus on peace. And I think that will be in line with, but my idea is that that is not the main from a climate perspective. But there are other reasons for fighting environments.
No, I'd just like to make one announcement that tomorrow at 3:30 in the afternoon or 15:30 European time, there will be another talk by Professor Nina on
It's good.
and she will speak on security and climate change, and you are welcome to join us. If you go to your different sources, you will see that it's posted at the same sites. You can also find this at manmade.org.
Mm.
And Staffan, thank you so much for a fantastic informative talk. And I
Thank
think
you.
deserve it.
Thank you. Och nu vänder jag mig på svenska och säger att det är mycket jag inte hunnit säga. Så att gå och titta i bokhyllan där. Några böcker där tror jag